A short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
All right, it's 1 minute past 4. I'm going to turn my volume down a little bit, just because I've got a little bit of feedback going on. Okay, so 1 minute past 4 in the UK. It should be around about 11 a.m. on the East Coast. It will be, in fact. I'm having a mellow, chilled out afternoon. I'm not really too concerned about what happens on the radio show today. I'm just going to see how I feel and what happens. I'll be playing a couple of videos, so of course we'll see what happens. So the show's called Free Association. My name's Dennis Barker. I'm based in the UK, in the north of England, and the chat room was talking about earthquakes a few minutes ago, because apparently there's been an earthquake in California, a small one. We don't get earthquakes very often here at all. I think I've had one in my entire 54 years on the planet. I've noticed one earthquake, so they don't happen very often in England, but they do happen occasionally. I felt one. There was one in North Yorkshire about 6 years ago, I think, 7 years ago maybe, and I felt that in Newcastle, which is roughly 70, 80 miles away, something like that, from where the earthquake actually was. It wasn't anything violent going on. It was just a bit of a rattle, like the flat that I was in, sharing with a guy called John and a couple of other people. And John came downstairs, said, "Did you feel that?" And there'd been a little bit of a rattle. That's about all it was, like a minor thing, but noticeable. So that's my experience of earthquakes. It's not very dramatic, and I don't want it to be particularly dramatic. I've had the experience, and that's enough for me. I don't need a 2.5 hour movie to experience an earthquake. So there you go. And you don't really need drama to experience anything. Well, most things. You need drama to experience drama, but you don't need drama to experience most of the things that happen in drama, because you can do it in a more subtle way, or an imaginative way, or a theatre way, where it's on the stage and you're watching it. You've still got the experience, but you're watching it as a third party, or sometimes if it's audience participation theatre, then you might get involved in the actual performance. So there's two ways you can experience everything, really. There's from a viewpoint that is you, or from a third party viewpoint, so associated or disassociated. And this becomes important when you're imagining how reality is going to be, or in the case of Neville Goddard's techniques, how reality is at this moment in time, which is actually the future, if that makes any sense at all. So the imagination creates reality thing is interesting. So I've come back to that again. We're back to first principles, really. First principles for imagination creates reality. I was in a philosophy group earlier on, and they were talking about being, and being is the first principle. The only way, well, consciousness of being is the next step, the next move, but being itself is the first move, I suppose. And existence without any consciousness of existence. You can exist without knowing anything at all, and then once you add the sensory inputs and the thought processes in terms of humans, or instinctual processes in terms of animals, or responses to environment, in terms of plants, then you've got an extra thing going on. But the first thing, the first move is being itself. And I was arguing that that adding attributes is, well, I didn't get as far as arguing this because the discussion got a bit sidetracked, but I'll argue it now that what Neville Goddard's doing is, when he's talking about feeling in the future or believing in the future, what he's doing is taking somebody back to being and then adding attributes, adding stuff, descriptive stuff. So being doesn't have a description, really. It's just something that exists without any knowledge or any experience of it, really. So once if you start from being, then I am is a way to express that. Then you can add a descriptive adjective or whatever, or a verb. So you go from I am to I am something. So you go from static to movement. Go from being to becoming. And once you add movement, then you've created time at that point. You've created a version of time, whether it's from a personal perspective or a universal perspective. So all of these things can be done at both of those levels. So if you're doing it at a universal level, we're talking about being as God, or as a creative force or a recognition force, some kind of life force, maybe. I'm making this up as I go along, but it kind of makes sense in its own way. And it's difficult to get your head around these concepts without using language, and language is a bit limiting, but I'll do my best. So if at a universal level, if you start with being, you can call that existence, or you can call it a monad, or you can call it reality. Reality is another word for God in philosophy, really. There's lots of different versions of reality, but they're all definitions of a first principle. And anything that's a first principle becomes the top of a hierarchy, or the beginning of a process that produces. So that makes it the creative force, and it's just another way of talking about God without using the word God, really. I don't mind either way. I can talk about reality or I can talk about God. It doesn't make any difference to me. Yeah. And before that, what came before God? So if being is God, then non-being must have come before God. That's the logic. Slavoj Žižek's a man for that kind of logic, and there's a Hindu tradition of that kind of thought process as well. So the first question in philosophy, or one of the first questions, is how come there's something? How did something come from nothing? And that's probably an unanswerable question, but that's why philosophy still exists after however many thousands of years, and they're still trying to answer the same questions. Because really, it's a way of having a conversation about conceptual things that are difficult to get a description of or get a handle on. And the language is always going to get confusing if there's more than 2 or 3 people involved and they maybe don't know each other, or they're coming from different parts of the world. They've got different belief systems that they've been brought up in, they're socialized in different traditions. And to find a common ground, you have to translate a little bit from religious language into philosophical language. And that's kind of what it's for, really. Well, I don't know whether I'm asking the question, what is philosophy for? But that's one of the things that it's for. If you think about the Silk Route, the route from China through Afghanistan, through Persia or through Iran and Iraq, into Turkey, into Europe, all of those places had trading posts, trading spots, along with their temples and their religious places, their places of worship. So when people were moving along the Silk Route, they were moving from China, from one belief system, through India to a slightly different version of the same kind of belief system, with different language and a slightly different structure. But the principles are similar. So if you move from China through India, through Afghanistan, into Persia, Persia's not that far away from India in its belief systems, but it's further away from what China was doing at the time, or is doing now, or whatever. It doesn't have to be located in a time period. This really, it's a universal principle. So if the merchants are moving along the Silk Route and trading with each other, they're going to want to have a conversation that's about more than just trade. So they might want to talk about their religion. They might want to talk about their philosophical assumptions, their philosophical principles. And that's where the language of philosophy comes in, because you've got to translate from the Chinese definition of God, or first principle, or the underlying assumptions that go into Taoism or Confucianism. You've got to translate that somehow into the Indian traditions, so that people can have a conversation. So to do that, you need a neutral set of concepts, possibly. I don't know. I'm making this up still, but I think this is probably how it was happening. So the neutral concepts become philosophical principles and philosophical language. And it's not that difficult to have a conversation between an Indian and a Chinese guy or woman, and a Persian guy or a Persian lady, and a Spanish guy or a Spanish lady, or a British guy or a British lady, with all of those people. You can do it. You don't have to argue about it necessarily if you can find common language. And if you can find common language, you can have a conversation. It might not be exactly the way that you're thinking, but somebody from a different place is probably going to be saying roughly the same thing. There's not that much difference between human beings that live in Europe and human beings that live in Asia. There really isn't. Everybody wants a quiet life pretty much, and everybody wants the best they can do for their family, and wants to enjoy friendship in a community. That's pretty much how it works. And philosophies are built around principles that underlie that, principles that underlie human existence in the world, human interaction with, and the relationship with nature, and all of that sort of thing. The idea of God and nature being the same thing is an interesting idea. That's pretty much what's Baruch Spinoza came up with in the, what was that, the 16th century, 17th century in Europe. Spinoza was a Dutch guy who got thrown out of the Jewish community and came up with his own version. And he got thrown out of the Jewish community in the Netherlands for coming up with his own version. And there are claims that he's an atheist, but he was trying to prove the existence of God. So and he didn't do a bad job of it, given the logic and the understanding of the time. So I like Spinoza. Spinoza's a good place to start in philosophy. It's actually probably where you'll end up. It's monist. There's no sense of two forces. There's only one force. So there is only God really in Spinoza. There's God in several different versions, but there is only really God. So there's no sense of evil. There's no real problem of evil in Spinoza, because whatever humans define as evil is still God in his way of thinking about it. And I tend to agree with him. I have a tendency to agree with him. And although it's difficult to get a sense of that at some point. Anyway, that's enough of me rambling. Let's play a video and see what we can do. So let's open up a bit of YouTube. And I might see if I can find a summary of Spinoza. If I can find a 10-minute summary, then we might be all right with that as I'm talking about it. I did promise a politics-free and virus-free zone, but it's tempting to just dip into the protest. It seems like it's happening. Let's not do that though. Let's just go for Spinoza. Let's go for philosophy. It's a ZA on the end. Spinoza and God. Let's see if we can find a 10 or 15-minute version. Alright, this is 25 minutes, the top one that came up, which might be a little bit too much, but we'll see if we can find something a bit shorter. Right, there's an 8-minute version here. Spinoza's God versus religion's gods. So let's try that, and then we'll go for God on nature after that. This is the Intellection Surge channel. Let's turn the sound up a little bit. We should be all right though. I've already shared the screen.
Welcome to the Intellection Surge. In this video on Spinoza's philosophy, we will try to clear all misconceptions about Spinoza's God.
Now I'll tell you what. Let's stop that for a second, and I'll put my Bluetooth speaker on and see if we can get some proper sound on it.
Bluetooth mode. The Bluetooth device is connected successfully.
All right. Nice little Chinese voice. So this is the concept, a basic definition. So dualism is it's the idea of good and evil. It's the idea of polarities, opposites, night and day, black and white. You get the idea. All of those obvious kind of dualistic opposites. But monism doesn't have that. Monism would put black and white on a spectrum with a range of tones going from black to white with grey in the middle somewhere. So you've got one thing that's a spectrum with a duality on each end. But that's a slightly different thing from just the duality. A lot of philosophies have got a monist element to them, and a lot of religions have got a monist element to them. Obviously, there's a difference between having one god or having many gods. That's a difference, kind of a difference between monism and plurality. That would be probably, or monism and duality, but expressed as a plurality. I don't know whether that makes sense or not, but I'm doing my best with this stuff. Yeah. So if you're worshipping a tree, if you're a druid and you're worshipping a tree, you're worshipping the tree as a representation of God and as a physical manifestation of God, simply probably because it's the oldest thing that exists. So a yew tree can last for 1,000 years or more. So it's the oldest thing in the area. That's why the Druids used to build churches or used to have their worship sites, their groves and their altars and whatever else, and their ceremonies and whatever else it was they did was based around trees. So it was tree worship basically, but trees being worshipped as a representation of a creative force. And the creative force you can't see, but you can see the manifestation of it, which is the yew tree. So all of these things make a difference to how people talk about the world and how people think about the world. It's a mental model of how the world is. So it makes a difference if you're using your imagination, whether you're making an assumption about monism or dualism. And both actually are options. You can live in a dualistic world, or you can live in a monist world. And it's up to you which you want to live in. For me, I prefer the monist version. I'm probably going to stick with it, even in this current situation. There's still, it's difficult to say that I'm not going to go to the virus, but if whatever is going on is a manifestation of God, then something positive will come out of it, and that's the way you can look at it. So whatever it is, that's a general way of looking at the world. If it's a manifestation of God, it might have been filtered in a particular way or skewed in a different direction that you don't necessarily go along with, but it is what it is. If God's omnipotent, then God is everywhere. If God isn't omnipotent, then you're automatically in a dualistic world. But if God's omnipotent and omnipresent, then everything is God. And it's a tricky thing to get your head around, but if that's the assumption of a lot of religions, and then it all gets buried in ceremonies and all the rest of it when it becomes organized. But if that's the underlying assumption that was there originally, then everything has to be God and everybody has to be God, which is a challenge. It's a challenge to me, and it's a challenge to everybody else probably. Where I'm working on the principle that everybody is God, including me, and including Bill Gates, and including Alexander the Great, and including Napoleon, and including Adolf Hitler, and including Pol Pot. So how the expression is the human part, but the underlying thing behind that is the God part. So in that sense, God is being. God is the undifferentiated thing without the attributes. And then once you add the attributes, it becomes human and becomes expressed as Napoleon or Attila the Hun or whoever, or as Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa being a collection of attributes, descriptions of a specific example of God. So I'm kind of talking Spinoza here. I'm talking Spinoza. I'm doing my best to use his language with a few of my ideas thrown in. And I haven't really done any philosophy in this show as a specific thing. So this is the most abstract I've probably been in the entire 6 months I've been doing the show. So we're not doing too badly. I usually resort to new thought or something similar as a version of philosophy, but this is another way of talking about it. It goes back to the 17th century. It's being plus attributes. So substance is the way that Spinoza talks about it. So substance has two ways of expressing. There's a material way of expressing, there's a thought way of expressing. So the material way of doing it would have attributes, and the thought way of doing it has attributes. So the two modes are physical or material and thought, and then the attributes build on the modes. That's the language that Spinoza uses. So just a reminder, you're listening to Revolution Radio. It's a Saturday afternoon in the UK. It's Saturday morning still in the US. I'm here every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And the show's called Free Association. Revolution Radio's listener supported. We rely on donations. And if you go to revolutionradio or freedomslips.com, you'll find a page there with a chat room on it. There's a place to buy merchandise. You can buy t-shirts or sweatshirts, mugs, whatever. There's a lot of things to buy. Or you can make a donation. You can make it a one-off donation, or you can sign up as a patron and make a monthly donation. And it keeps the studios running. There's 2 studios running 24 hours a day. There's some good stuff on there. I tend to rely on the archives for most of it because I'm working during the week. But if you can listen live, then there's plenty of interaction going on. You get the option of calling into quite a few shows as well, or you can arrange with whoever's presenting beforehand to go on and have a conversation. It's up to you. It is a listener supported and run by volunteers station. So keeping 2 studios running does take money, and we are grateful for everything that we receive. So I'm not going to play a video. I'm just going to keep talking today, I think. Although I don't quite know what about. So let's talk about my websites. We can go through one at a time. So there's a website for the radio show, which is freeassociationradioshow.com. That'll take you to a site with a long name with radio projects in it, but it's the same thing really. And I set it up quite a while ago. I set it up more or less when I started the radio show. I didn't know what was going to be on there, but it's turned out that I've put a business directory on there. So if anybody wants to be listed in the business directory, you can make a contribution to what I'm doing on the website, or you can sign up for a listing. There's a donation thing on the front page, so you're welcome to. You don't have to, but you can. If you want a listing in the directory, make a donation, and I'll put you in the directory. And then we'll see how that goes. There's only me there at the moment, so. But that was the theory of how to fund the website, is set up a business directory. It may or may not work. We'll see, but it's a good idea in principle. So there's another site that I set up while I was developing the radio show, which is imaginationcreatesreality.live. And the idea of that one is to meet with people on a monthly basis, people who are using imagination to express a particular version of the world, and we'll sit and help each other to create the world that we want to see. And again, I don't know whether it'll work or not. It was just an idea. It's just a way of me developing the website and developing the radio show. So there's an option there to pay a subscription, and if enough people pay a subscription, I'll set up events, and if nobody shows up, then I'll not. There's there's quite a few websites along the way. So ReikiMasterInitiation.com is another website that I've had for a while, and I've spent 20 years doing Reiki sessions for people. It's getting much more obvious what happens with me with hands-on healing. I tend to just do this with people at work at the moment, but there's a potential to do it over the internet. So that's another place where if you make a contribution, there are a couple of things that I sell on there. But if you want to make a contribution, just get in touch with me. Give me $1 and I'll send you some Reiki. And Reiki is universal energy, so it's another way of saying life force, or saying it's known as prana or mana, or you can potentially think about it as the Holy Spirit. There's some overlap with that. So that's 3. There's another one there that's the Cancer Cure Mastermindgroup.com. So I was about the definition of cure for a while on the show, and I had a conversation with Mona on her show where I was talking about different definitions of cure. So that website came out of those conversations. So most of what I'm doing has come out of conversations over the last 6 months. The final thing I want to talk about before I move on to whatever I'm talking about next is the Discord server. The Discord server is called Free Association Radio Show Live. And that's a place that I can have a conversation with you in a voice chat room. So if you want to have a conversation with me about anything at all, really, feel free to track me down on Discord. I'm called Open Philosopher on Discord, as I am here. I'm quite happy to have a conversation with people. If you want to suggest something that I talk about on the show, that's probably the easiest way to do that, or on Skype. You can find me on Skype as Open Philosopher as well. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. So I'm kind of at first principles. So going back to first principles, in terms of imagination creates reality, it's going back to being. So if we wanted to do this live, that will be the place to start. If we wanted to do this live in a Zoom video conference or in a Skype video conference, the place to start would be to take everybody back to a place of just being, and then to slowly and carefully build up a description and feel that description as being here and now, and then have a conversation from that point of view with the other people in the meeting, who then affirm the existence of that combination of things. So one of the things that Neville Goddard talks about is having the conversation that you would have from the place that you're imagining into existence. And that's one of the things that I'm planning to do in these events in the Imagination Creates Reality .live. So when people find it, and when we've got enough people to actually organise a meeting, that's something that I'm going to do. And having the conversation live with other people that know how to have those conversations is probably something that will be a huge catalyst in the Imagination Creates Reality process. I don't know exactly because I haven't done it yet, but that's the way I'm imagining it. Is the conversation, the live conversation, is a way of reinforcing from the universe side of things. So there's my side, which is my individual point of view, and then there's other people, which is the universe from my point of view. So if I'm having a conversation with the universe about a particular set of qualities, a particular description of myself that I'm bringing into existence, then that's a feedback loop. It becomes a feedback loop. And it is a feedback loop. So it's reinforcing and making current, making here and now, the definition of yourself that you would like to exist. All right, so let's see where we can go from here. So what I'm gonna do, I think, is, because we're on first principles again today, I'm just gonna look at being and see if I can get a definition from the Encyclopedia of Philosophy of being. So it's a definition on Wikipedia. Right, ontology.co. Looks like it might have a definition, but that looks a bit complex. So let's go with Britannica.com, which is the Encyclopedia Britannica. see what it's got to say for itself. So, philosophical interpretations. So we've got Aristotle. For Aristotle, oops, hang on, there's an advert just popped up there. Let's get rid of that. They do like to collect email addresses. So for Aristotle, being is whatever is anything whatever. So for Aristotle, being in inverted commas is whatever is anything whatever. Whenever Aristotle explains the meaning of being, he does so by explaining the sense of the Greek verb to be. Being contains whatever items can be subjects of true propositions containing the word is. So anything that is has the quality of being, is what they're saying. It's what Aristotle's saying. Let's see if we can. So being contains whatever items can be subjects of true propositions containing the word is, whether or not the is followed by a predicate. Thus both Socrates is and Socrates is wise say something about being. Every being in any category other than substance is a property or a modification of substance. Alright, it's jumping around a little bit, but let's see where we can go with this. The language is always a little bit ridiculous in these things because it's old language, but so here we go. I've got a little bit of a definition here from Aristotle. Aristotle divided theoretical sciences into three groups: physics, mathematics, and theology. Physics, as he understood it, was equivalent to what would now be called natural, I'm guessing that's going to be philosophy. It is philosophy, or the study of nature, physis. In this sense, it encompasses not only the modern field of physics, but also biology, chemistry, geology, psychology, and even meteorology. Metaphysics, however, is notably absent from Aristotle's. Jumped around a bit too much there. Metaphysics, however, is notably absent from Aristotle's classification. Indeed, he never uses the word, which first appears in the posthumous catalogue of his writings as a name for the works after the physics. He does, however, recognize the branch of philosophy now called metaphysics. He calls it first philosophy and defines it as the discipline that studies being as being. There we go. So, first philosophy is first principles. And if you were going to come up with a discipline that studies being as being, straight away you're into abstract concepts. And how can you study being? You can study what things are, which is a description of their being. You can study how things behave, how plants and animals behave, how they develop, which is their becoming. But being and becoming, are they the same? Because if you start as an infant, you start as a totally dependent baby, experiencing the world in one way, and then as an older child, you experience the world in a different way, and your behaviour is different. What do you have the same being? Are you the same? Is there something about me as an infant, me as a newborn, and me as a 7-year-old that was the same, that is the same, or something about me as a newborn and me as a 55-year-old. That's the same. The thing that stays the same is the existence of me, the being of me. Everything else is different. The description's different, behavior's different, thought processes are different. But I do still exist. I still am. But the only thing you can say about me as an infant and me as a 55-year-old is that I exist. Everything else has changed. Everything else is different. Or is it? Is there something there? Is there something there? I don't know. I mean, I breathe. Do I breathe the same now as when I was a newborn baby? Probably not, because I would have been gasping for breath when I was, like, in the seconds after I was born. I would have been gasping for breath. But after that, there's a rhythm to it, and that rhythm varies a little bit within a range, but it's basically the same. So you could say that within a couple of minutes of being born, my breath rhythm exists, and it stays within a range that is me. As long as it stays within that range, then it would be defined as me. And there's nowhere else for it to go, really, because it's like, as long as I exist, I have to breathe. So however I breathe, that has to be defined as me. Anyway, all of these things I think about. These are the things that keep me awake at night. And there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot to not think about at the moment as well. I'd rather think about my existence and how my breath is related to my existence than anything else that's going on in the world at the moment. I'd much rather just stick with that. It's nice, and it's a simple set of ideas that are related to each other, that are just about the relationship and the rhythm, and maybe, well, I know breath at some point affects psychology, so there's some kind of relationship with psychology and with thought processes as well. And different types of breathing are related to different types of different versions of me. There was a time when I was quite anxious and my breathing was shallow and fast. Now I'm not as anxious, my breathing is deeper and longer. So does that qualify as a change of being? I'm still the same person, but my breathing pattern has changed. It's still within a range of human breathing patterns, so I'm still defined as human, but one version of Dennis is noticeably different to another version of Dennis. So does that make me the same person or a different person? I don't know. I really don't know. It feels like it's the same person, but then I look back on my life and I see me as a 20-year-old thinking in ways that I don't think anymore, thinking in ways that a 20-year-old version of me used to think about the world. It's very, very different now. I've changed the way I think about the world. So in that thought process, have I become a different person? Or am I the same person thinking in a different way? I don't know. Really don't know. I suppose I could probably define that any way I want to define it, depending on the circumstances and what I'm trying to do. But if I was to think about that in a way that's natural to me, without any input from the outside, without actually wanting to do anything with it, apart from just think about it, contemplate it, I would probably say it's natural. It's a natural progression of the same person. So the anxious version of me and the calmer, more thoughtful version of me are still they're versions of me. So they're attributes of my being. Using this language, using Spinoza's language. So attributes of my substance. Okay, I think that's about as far as I can take that particular thought process. Let's have a look in the chat room and see who's in the chat room and say hello. So we've got a list of people. There's a visitors list. The chat room is at revolution.radio. So let's have a look at who's in there. We've got Fake War, Grog is in there, Mitzi, Mer Bailey, Eagle Flower, Boy Solomon's in there, Dry Fly Guy has been in there, Lady Horse is in there, has been in there, Blasphemous Buddha, Navy, earlier on Gino was in there, Gino 2017, and there's a few other people that have been around in the last 24 hours or so. So say hello to all of those people. Let's get back to the chat. So once again, you're listening to Revolution Radio. My name's Dennis. The show's called Free Association. If you want to find me on the internet, you can find me in a Discord server called Free Association Radio Show Live. You can find me at freeassociationradioshow.com. You can also find me at cancercuremastermindgroup.com or imaginationcreatesreality.live and at reikimasterinitiation.com. So there's quite a few different projects on the go. They all kind of rely on input from other people in some way or another. Imagination creates reality is the most interesting for me at the moment because it ties in with what I've been doing on the radio show for the last 6 months. And then the definition of cure that I was talking about a few weeks ago produced the Cancer Cure Mastermind Group website. That's a redefinition and a reimagination of cancer cures. So it's a combination of the things that I've been doing. That's also interesting to me. But we're more or less at the end of the show, so I shall be back at 11 a.m. East Coast time next Saturday, 4 p.m. UK time. We'll do some more videos next week probably. I don't always talk for 55 minutes on this show. Sometimes I just play a couple of videos. But we're back to basics this week, so we covered a lot of ground. And I'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening, folks.